Hi there, this is Nicole Watkins with Morgan James Publishing, and I am here today with author Brent Taylor talking about his recent release, Presidential Leadership. Brent, thank you so much for being here with me today. Very excited to celebrate the release of your newest title and just to dive a little bit deeper into talking about some of the background.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. Honored to.
Excellent. So my first big question for you, of course, is what motivated you to write this book, Brent?
Well, that's a great question because I was motivated. The book is entitled Presidential Leadership, What Presidents Can Teach You About Being a Better Leader. And I am passionate about helping people discover how to be a better leader. I think there is an absence in many ways of leadership in our culture. And I think that we need leaders today who are not just leaders by position because they've been given a title, but they're leaders because they actually lead. In my first book, Founding Leadership, I talked about what makes a leader, and I've called presidential leadership the action figure for the first book because it's where the reader can learn more about how to actually put leadership principles in place. And so I was motivated as a university professor. I work with college students and trying to help them understand how to lead in our culture today. And I was driven by a desire for people to really comprehend for their own life what leadership looks like, whether it's in their home or in their job out in the public sector, people who are serving in nonprofits, people who are working in government. And I think the nation's presidents actually have a lot to teach us being in what we consider to be the highest office in the land.
Excellent, excellent. Love that. And so one thing that I would love to know, Brent, is was there one principle that really stood out to you from the example of the presidents?
So what I do in the book is I do something a little unusual. I don't pick individual presidents, but instead I pair presidents together. And they're presidents that aren't normally paired together. They're not people that you normally think of. For example, I have all the modern presidents from the last 30 years or so in the book, from President Trump today all the way back to Jimmy Carter and John F. Kennedy and people like that. Plus I have presidents that go back to our nation's founding. But what I did was I tried to pair people that don't normally go together to draw out a principle, either how they both did that leadership principle well, or how maybe one did it well and the other didn't do it so well. And probably the leadership principle that doesn't get talked about all that much in leadership books, and yet I think it's really important. It draws out Abraham Lincoln and Richard Nixon. Now, those are two that are not normally paired together, and I understand that. But, both went through heartache in their life. Both lost family members at a young age. Both were wartime presidents. Both ended unpopular wars, while I'll say that. Both were Republicans. And so they had some things in common. And yet, really, the thing that stands out about them is their difference. And the difference that I really highlight is that leaders learn how to forgive. And what we see in Abraham Lincoln is the nation torn apart by war, strife, heartache, all of these things. And yet Lincoln recognized that we have to show malice toward none. We have to appeal to the better angels of our nature. He wanted to bring the country together again, as opposed to tearing it apart even more. When you flash forward to Richard Nixon, obviously Richard Nixon had a lot of enemies. In fact, he had an enemies list that probably most people are familiar with. And yet he could never forgive people. If somebody hurt him, if somebody said something to him or did him wrong, he could never forgive that person. And I really think what makes Abraham Lincoln, and Richard Nixon really revolves around that issue of forgiveness, because they were both great leaders and great influencers. And yet one was willing to take the hurt and the heartache and put it behind him. and the other one could never let it go. And I deal with so many people, I deal with so many leaders who are holding on to a grudge. They're holding on to some baggage from the past that they just can't let go. And it destroys their life. It destroys their career. So often it destroys relationships and families. And so that is really kind of the one leadership principle. That's just one chapter of the book, but that is really the one leadership principle that that I draw out. And it's interesting to me that on the front of the book, I've got these different silhouettes of different presidents, and here I've got Abraham Lincoln and Richard Nixon right next to each other. They may be close on the front of the book, but on that issue of being able to forgive, they're pretty far apart.
What a fascinating way to link the presidents, just throughout history. I love that you really take that perspective and that deep dive into looking at those different characteristics and drawing that out for us all to learn from. So obviously with the time that we're in right now, how important is a book like this during an election year, Brent?
Well, that's probably kind of the like an understatement of the year. That's kind of the question of the year normally, but 2020 has just been so off the rails with everything this year. It's just so unusual. But I wrote this book in really there was something on my heart when I wrote the book, and that was to draw out leadership principles from the presidents. But one of the things that I don't do is I don't tear apart any of the presidents. I don't try to tear them down, beat them up, destroy them. There are plenty of books for all sorts of people that are in my book that you can find that kind of information. But in a time where our political landscape has become, I have my opinion, and I'm not really concerned about your opinion. I'm concerned about destroying you. I think that has the potential of leading to destruction in our democracy. And there was a time that probably many people even viewing this video remember when political opponents would argue all day long and then they'd go out to dinner at night. And now we're living in an era where there is such anger and bitterness and vitriol and rage. I really feel like we've got to get back to a civil discourse. And this book tries to draw out principles of leadership that are positive in people's lives and in these presidents' lives without trying to tear them down. I think there's a lot to be said for finding good in other people's lives and trying to emulate those things and trying to put those principles into practice without seeking to spend our lives just trying to destroy everybody else. The more that we try to destroy other people, the more we end up destroying our own lives and destroying ourselves. 2020 has been a year that no one will ever forget, and it has been a disaster for a lot of people personally. And what I am desiring and hoping for is that it's not a disaster politically, that no matter what the outcome of the election is, that our nation will seek to, as Abraham Lincoln talked about, bind up those wounds for the betterment of our nation and for the good of the people. Our nation is still young. People forget that. And it is still an experiment, and I believe in the best in people. And so I really wanted to try to draw out some leadership characteristics that would might bring people together.
I love that so much, Brent. And I think just especially with this year that we all have faced together, what a message to send to really end things on that positive note. I love that you say that, within this book, it's not a tear down, but it's finding those elements that really make us come together as a nation. And that's what we need to remember, is that, we are all in this together. And if we focus on the negative, that's, ultimately going to be the outcome of, continuing down this nation. So I really love that you pull that element out. And I know that there's a lot of people watching today that are going to want more information about you and your current release. So where would be the best place for them to further connect with you?
Well, it's probably the best choice is to go to drbrenttaylor.com, and there's no period in that, brenttaylor.com, and that's where you can find a copy of Presidential Leadership. And there's also information about another Morgan James book that I published called Founding Leadership, and you can find both of those on my website at drbrenttaylor.com.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And just to let everyone know as well, Dr. Brent Taylor's books are available wherever books are sold, but definitely check out the website to get further connected and see what good things he's got going on for us. Thank you again, Brent, for our wonderful conversation today on a really, really important topic.
Thank you. Honored to be here, and I'm excited about hopefully encouraging and helping other people with this book.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you again.
Thank you.